well, we're going to Seattle, it's a dinner, it's in a nice place, so we better put on a tie. Well, I see we're the only two people who have ties on, so I want to start by just saying something to make clear why I'm here tonight. I'm not here to ask anybody to support the Pebble project. We've never asked anybody to support the Pebble project because we don't have a final mine plan. We should only be judged when we have that final mine plan. And so what I do want to do here tonight is to explain where we are in the process, what we've been doing, and then I want to talk later on about some sort of more generic issues, some of which affect not only the industry I work in, but also the industry you work in. Just a little map to show where Pebble is, so many of you may be familiar with it. We're about 240 miles southwest of Anchorage in the Bristol Bay region. I like to show this map for a couple reasons. The light green areas on the map are national parks. The dark green areas are wildlife refuges. If you look to the left of the map, there's an outline of the Woodtick State Park. That's the largest state park in the United States, set up by the state of Alaska. So there's a lot of area, a lot of acreage in this area that's been protected in conservation system units and will never be developed. The Pebble is located on state land, and how the state got this land, I think, is interesting. It came about as a result of a three-way land trade between Cook Inlet Region, the Native Corporation for South Central Alaska, the federal government, and the state of Alaska. Cook Inlet Region had land selection rights in what became Lake Clark National Park, the park in the upper right. They gave up those land selection rights. The state of Alaska gave back to the federal government land that the state had already owned so that CIRI could select that land in South Central Alaska, where there weren't a lot of other opportunities. And the state got the right to select these lands out there, which were originally being considered for being put into Lake Clark National Park. Now, for those of you who understand much about the Alaska Statehood Act, the reason that Alaska was given a large land grant, over 100 million acres, was because Congress at the time believed that the only way that the state of Alaska would survive economically is through resource development. And certainly that has proven to be the case, particularly given what came about because of Prudhoe Bay. We're in two drainages, the Kvichak and the Nushagak drainages. We're actually close to three streams, the north and south fork of the Kotkula and the upper Tulare. The watersheds for these streams make up less than 1% of the Bristol Bay drainage, but none of those streams are actually in the prospect. The prospect itself is large. It's a world-class prospect. It's a state asset. It does belong to the people of the state, as I said, on state land. We've identified about 10 billion tons of potential resource there. We break the project down really into two parts. Pebble West, which is near the surface, would clearly be an open pit mine. On Pebble East, which could be either mined open pit or underground. It's primarily a copper mine. In terms of volume, it's about 95% copper. In terms of value, it's about 60% copper, 30% gold, and 10% molybdenum and other minerals. We estimate that the life of the mine could be anywhere from 70 to 100 years, from what we know about the prospect now, depending, of course, on what rate the prospect was mined at. But we would never try to permit a mine for a life that long. It really doesn't make sense, I think, for a government agency to try to predict what might happen in 70 or 100 years. So certainly we get into permitting, we'll probably go in for something along the lines of about 20 years, and then as has been done with the Red Dog mine up north of the Arctic Circle, where they came in last year and permitted the second phase of their mine. There would be potentially other phases, but at the beginning there would just be the first phase. Right now we're in advanced exploration. It means we're doing several things. We continue to drill to try to make sure we get maximum understanding of the geology. We're continuing our environmental studies. I'm going to talk more about them in minute. We're obviously engineering, to engineer a project that has not only a large mine involved in the processing with it, but substantial infrastructure, which I'll also mention in a bit. And we're looking at the technical aspects of all of that, and then also working on socioeconomic issues that relate to the region and the state. We have a substantial science program. As a matter of fact, we've spent over $120 million just on our science. This is more money, I know, than it's ever been spent on environmental studies for any mine anywhere in the world. And we also did it slightly differently than some mines do it. Many mines, when they come out, they'll choose 2 or 3 large consulting firms to do the studies. We have over 40 different consulting firms in all different disciplines. We went out to try to find people who have the best ability in various disciplines, and in some disciplines, like fish, for instance, we actually have 3 different consultants involved. We took the first 5 years of our data a little over a year ago and published it in what we call an environmental baseline document. There was 27,000 pages of information. It's on our website for anyone who wants to look at it. But you know, if you're, for instance, interested in fish, there's a chapter on fish, and you can go and see what we've done with fish. And if you're interested in water, there's chapters on water. And this was unprecedented. Usually, companies will not release this kind of data until they actually go into permitting. We were, our opposition said that we should give our information early, so we have given it early. And there's I think, some misinformation about this also. This is just data. It's things like weather and what happens with water and where fish spawn and things like that. It's not, never was designed to show potential impacts, because that's what happens when we have a mine plan. We take this information and we will have to show what potential impacts the mine might have on the area, and then how we're going to mitigate those impacts. The study locations, the mine area is the area on the left-hand side of the screen. And then right now our sort of preferred transportation route is along the northern side of Lake Iliamna and out into the coast and the west side of Cook Inlet. I'm not going to go over all the kinds of studies we do, but I'm going to go over several of them. Hydrological studies are important to us, and they have to go on year-round. Particularly things like stream flows vary dramatically from one part of the year to another, so our environmental people are out there. We basically usually open up the environmental studies the second week in January and run them through the second week in December. Wetlands, of course, Alaska, as some of you know, is populated with a lot of wetlands, and we're in wetlands. We have over 17,000 field plots of wetlands around the Prospect area. We've done numerous kinds of fish surveys, aerial surveys, radio tracking we did with rainbow trout, snorkel surveys where the people actually get in the water and count the fish by swimming along. We do aquatic habitat surveys. This is very important because we need to understand the fish, as you guys probably know better than I do. Different kinds of habitats are important to them at different points of their lifestyle, particularly for salmon. So understanding what the habitats are and what part of the life cycle the salmon and other fish use it is important to us. We've looked at sort of the distribution along the 3 main creeks that are near us, Upper Tularik, the North and South Fork of the Coktuli, to try to understand which species of salmon use them and where they spawn. And different parts of the streams you'll find different fish that spawn in different places, so we have all that kind of information. I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure because I think it's something that will be of interest to at least some of you here, particularly those of you in transportation and logistics. As you know, most of Alaska has no transportation infrastructure, and we're no different in that regard. So we'll need a road that will be between 80 and 90 miles. There's the little black line on sort of the right-hand side is an existing sort of pioneer road that is there. We would have to substantially upgrade that. So we have to build a road. We may build pipelines to move the concentrate, although that's still open. We also, rather than a road and pipeline, we're also still considering whether or not a railroad makes sense as a way to haul things back and forth. But no matter what, there's a tremendous amount of logistics involved, because we have, in order to operate a large mine, there's a lot of things that have to come in. It'll be a camp situation. We'll need to bring in food and other supplies. We'll need to bring in explosives and lubricants and everything else, and tires and all the kinds of things you need to run a mine. So I think that there are potential opportunities there. The other place that I think there's a huge potential opportunity for the region is in energy. We need somewhere around 500 megawatts of solar power. That's close to what Anchorage uses. Any of you that pay electric bills in rural Alaska know that the price of energy can range anywhere from 50 cents a kilowatt hour to over $1, depending on where you are and whether fuel was flown in or barged in, and a whole bunch of other variables. Our mine is not economic with that kind of electricity. So our energy source will likely be natural gas. At this point, probably likely imported liquefied natural gas, since we know we can get that. Now, if gas came off the North Slope where there were huge finds in Cookian, that would change, of course. But we have said to the people of the region that we will engineer into our power plant enough excess capacity so that if there's a way to transport the electricity from our mine site to the rest of the region, we will sell it at cost. So that can have a huge implication for a whole variety of people. Certainly businesses, because businesses don't get any power subsidy in Alaska. Residences do, but businesses don't. Schools don't get any power subsidy. So a huge cost for educating students in rural Alaska is electricity. So it is a possibility, I think, that where we will show that we can not only do something that benefits us, but benefits other people in the area. I want to talk a little bit about fish and mining. I think that's the issue here, whether or not a large mine and fish can coexist. So I'd like to talk about sort of the experience in Alaska recently, but of course before I do that, I always have to mention the Kennecott mine, which was the largest copper mine in the United States back in the early part of the last century. That mine was in the headwaters of the Copper River, and was, although certainly it's a different chemistry than we have in our resource, a much higher density of copper than we have. That mine was mined at a time when there were no environmental controls. And I think we all know that probably if anybody's ever heard of one kind of salmon in Alaska, it's Copper River salmon. But sorts of things have changed since the early part of the last century. So we have a number of mines in Alaska that operate today, none of which have destroyed the fisheries. As a matter of fact, the opposite has happened. The Red Dog mine, which is sort of in the upper left corner north of the Arctic Circle, which I was involved in when I worked for NANA. The first time I saw Red Dog Creek, which was well before any mining took place, there was so much natural acid in that creek that there were no fish. The mining company diverted that creek, and it now supports fish. It's not the kind of robust fishery, obviously, in Bristol Bay, but it does support fish. And Pogo, which is a mine, or not Pogo, Fort Knox, which is a mine near Fairbanks, had a project with Fish and Game to go back in and restore habitat that had been impacted previously to establish fish habitat. So, the mining industry, I think, has a good record of working with the Department of Fish and Game, not only to protect the resources that are there, but to enhance the fisheries in the area. And that's something that we think would be an essential part of anything we do in our project. Any of you that know anything about mining and large mines know that you have a tailings impoundment facility. The tailings impoundment facility is where we put the waste that's done after we're finished processing the ore and making what we call concentrate and shipping that out. Concentrate is our product. And so the question always arises, well, aren't you in a seismic area? And the answer, of course, is yes, we are. So do we have any experience with mines in seismic areas? And we do. Now, most of you in the room that are in the fish business have heard of Chile, for obvious reasons, since there are the fishermen in Alaska are not very fond of that country. and their fish product, but they're also a large mining country. And in 2010, there was an 8.8 earthquake with about 160 aftershocks. All the modern tailings and pounder facilities held. So, I mean, we do have experience that you can engineer for this kind of situation. I want to talk a little bit about some things that you know about and relate to a little bit of this, how we've studied the project. The economics of fishing, I think, is one of the most challenging economics I've ever seen. I've had friends in the fishing industry. I think some of them are still my friends. And, you know, I've watched things, and particularly, this is Bristol Bay, you know, what's happened as both the price and the volume of fish, the harvest of fish has gone up and down. Now, recently, obviously, the harvests have come back some, the price has come back some, which made everybody happy, but we all need to remember that there was a time in this industry where sockeye was getting $2 a pound, and gasoline and diesel was about $1 a pound. Now the fish price is about half of that, and the fuel price is about 4 to 6 times what it was then. And so the economics has changed in the industry. Also, the impact, the economic impact on local people has changed. And so if you look at the graph in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see that the earnings for people that fish that don't live in the state have sort of continued to rise, and the red line, which is for the people that live in the region, has continued to decline. And this has led to some things. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the reasons for the decline in the ownership. I'm happy to discuss them with you later if anybody wants to. But what this has led to is, I think, a very serious economic situation where we see declining populations in this region, as of course well as other regions of the state. And this is driven by the fact that there really aren't a lot of economic opportunities out there. And the cost of living has just skyrocketed because of the high cost of energy. I talked about electricity a little bit ago. I just got a slide the other day from somebody that showed gasoline in their village is $8.40 a gallon. I've seen it as high as $10 a gallon. Milk can be $10 to $12 a gallon. I saw in a store in Dillingham a gallon of orange juice for $24. And so the combination of very high cost of living and low economic opportunities is causing people to move out of the area. And there are a lot of small villages there, and what happens in small villages is you have to have 10 students to have a school. And if you don't have 10 students, they close your school, as happened at Pebble Bay, which is a village on our road route. And what we've seen in Alaska is once you lose your school, you basically have lost your village. And so, I've spent a lot of my career trying to find opportunities for people living in rural Alaska. And as I tell people, I didn't take this job because I'm concerned about the world's supply of copper. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I think this potentially has some opportunity to change people's lives in a region that is in serious economic trouble. And so, if you look at something like Pebble Bay, when I started working, they had about 50 to 60 people in their village. Once they lost their school, they're down to 15. You go to Ivanhoe Bay, they lost their school a number of years ago, they're down to 0. So it is an issue, and I think it's an issue that people should be concerned about. We work with the elders. It's not surprising that they have certain roles. Obviously, subsistence is important to them. The fish that they get from subsistence is critical. And so they're very concerned about that and concerned about any effects that the mine might have on those fish. But they're also concerned about their young people and what might happen to their young people and whether or not there are going to be any economic opportunities so that those young people can continue to stay in their communities. I need to do one quick technical thing here, and if it works, we'll be fine, and if it doesn't, we'll...
Okay, so let's see what else is missing from this picture. We'll start with extraction, which is a fancy word for natural resource exploitation, which is a fancy word for trashing the planet. What this looks like is we chop down the trees, we blow up mountains to get the metals inside, we use up all the water, and we wipe out the animals.
you guys are wiping out animals, I'm blowing up mountains. So I'm going to ask, how many people think that's correct? Look at this one.
You think half of it is correct?
Which half?
That we're not destroying the animals. We're harvesting under a management system that continues to exist
Right.
in the state of Alaska.
Right,
Which
it's
is in part of the Constitution.
and it's one of the best management systems, and and everybody's learned from it.
So half of that is right.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. But the other half
That's
is.
what you're up against here tonight.
I understand that.
All right.
No, I get that. But I think it's this line of thinking that is of danger to everybody, whether it's the mining industry or the fishing industry or the oil industry or anyone else that wants to develop things in our economy. So you get really this kind of statement now from people in the environmental community. This is a statement from Kieran Suckling, who's the co-founder of the Center for Biological Diversity, the people that like to put everything that they can think of on the endangered species list. The core talent of the successful environmental campaign is not science and law, it's campaign instinct. Now I think for any of us, whether you're in the fishing industry or the mining industry, the oil industry, we thought it was about science and law. That we spend a lot of time worrying about science and law. But the environmental community, I think, you know, and I don't want to be too critical here, our country is a much better place because of things that the environmental community has done for us. But things have changed, and I think that it's changed in a way now that the environmental community is much more inclined to say all development's bad. Every bit of development just destroys stuff, and therefore we can't deal with science and law anymore. We have to deal with campaign instinct. So we get to our opposition coming to the, you get your question later. We get to the Environmental Protection Agency. Our opposition being asked, are asking the EPA to come in and shut us down before we go into the permitting process. Totally unprecedented in our country. Just saying, ignore due process, ignore all the things that have been set up by law, just come in and shut down the project. So they didn't do that. Instead, they did what they call a watershed assessment. They originally started out to do the whole of Bristol Bay, and then they cut it down to the Kvichak and Nushagak watersheds. This is the largest watershed assessment they've ever done. And they did it in the shortest amount of time. And so we believe, is flawed, and I think there are others that have seen flaws in it, although our opposition just keeps saying, well, finish it. Don't worry about the facts, just finish it and get done with it. It's a very bad precedent for the Environmental Protection Agency, for any industry, because this just doesn't deal with mining, for any industry, for the government to be able to come in and say, you do not have an opportunity to even tell us how you'll build your mine, how you'll build your fish plant, how you do that. It's just wrong. I just got a couple more slides, and then you guys can harass me. You know, the other thing that, of course, is true in the environmental movement is you really don't have to be, you can be pretty loose with the facts. So, you know, we've been accused by the NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, of being a threat to the belugas. Well, you know, we're not the Cook Inlet belugas. Well, we're not in, the mining part is not in the Cook Inlet watershed. There's nothing about it, and the $120 million that we spent on science would confirm that. But we're not the only ones that the environmentalists pick on. I don't know if any of you remember this Greenpeace ad, but this was an ad aimed largely at the offshore fishing industry, where they basically claimed in 2008 that the whole industry was about to collapse because of overfishing. Well, what actually happened? I borrowed this slide from my friend David Benton. You know, well, you in the industry know very well what happened. It didn't collapse. It's a very well-managed fishery that's provided thousands and thousands of jobs for people. So I just want you to think, you know, when you jump to very quick conclusions about us, that in some ways we are in similar situations. Well, I like to end on a more positive note. So this is an ad that was run by our opposition. And it's an ad we actually agree with. Because it's not this place. It's not. It's this place. Our opposition likes to show that the mine's going to be in the middle of a nice river, and it's not. This is not this time. We would agree with that. We're not ready yet. This is a very complicated project. I mean, we know where the resource is, we know how to process the resource, but getting the environmental pieces right takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And it's something we want to do right, and that's why we have not announced a project description yet, because we're not ready with those pieces in it. And not this mine. Well, you know, anybody can design a mine that fails. Anybody can do that. The EPA did it in their watershed assessment. Our opposition does it on a regular basis. Our challenge is to design a mine that can succeed. It's a huge challenge. It's one I take very seriously. And it's one I hope to be able to come back someday and report to you how we intend to do that. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, John.
This will start our question and answer period. For those of you who have questions, we set up a mic at the back over by Val. Please walk over there, ask your question from the mic. Please be courteous.
You don't have to be courteous. I take a lot of grief in my career. If I wanted to be easy, I would have stayed with Holland America. Just when I was here.
Mr. Shively takes a lot of position on.
Yep, you're on.
Thanks for coming out here. I think most of us would agree it takes a lot of cojones to stand in front of this group, so good on you for doing that. My name's Brett Dergusen. I'm a Bristol Bay fisherman, and I represent the 87% of Bristol Bay fishermen who strongly oppose the Pebble mine. And you just recently spoke about the EPA's watershed assessment, and I'd like to ask you a question regarding a letter that I have here in my hand from Washington Senator Maria Cantwell that was filed on Monday of this week.
I'm familiar with the letters.
Are you? Well, I don't know if everybody here is. One of the things that Senator Cantwell states and raises a question with the Securities and Exchange Commission regards the Wardrop report, of which filed in 2011, Northern Dynasty, which I believe owns 50% of the Pebble Partnership, which you're the CEO of, informed the SEC and investors that the proposed Pebble mine design and specifications are feasible and permittable in a press release from 2011. It's also on the file with the agency. Senator Cantwell also says that Northern Dynasty Minerals referred to the very same Wardrop report as a, quote, fantasy proposal when it delivered formal testimony to the EPA in August of 2012. Now, this contradictory use of this Wardrop report is extremely concerning, as it is unclear whether Northern Dynasty Minerals is misleading your investors with this report that, quote, says that it is meets the design and specifications that is feasible to have North America's largest open pit mine. Is misleading investors by attracting investment for a fantasy proposal, or is it intentionally providing fraudulent testimony to the EPA? So my question is, last year you said that you were going to issue a permit and you didn't. This year we're still waiting on when you will issue a permit. Have you already issued a permit through the Wardrop report, through your investors, that is on file already with the Security and Exchange Commission?
Well, you had a long question. My answer won't be quite as long, but it's going to be somewhat long. First of all, the Wardrop report is not a report from PLP, and in fact, if you want to read the Wardrop report, it specifically states that it's Northern Dynasty's opinion, it is not PLP's opinion.
But they own 50% of your company.
They own 50% of the company, but they're entitled to their own opinion. There is, this whole right of free speech in our country. I actually asked them not to issue that report because I thought it was premature. I have stated on a number of occasions we want to get into permitting. We would like to have a project.